Hey guys, these notes are Key Concept 5.2, which is imperialism and nation state formation. This is going to be a good bit of video, so sit down, get comfy, and let's jump right into this. Here's your outline. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is what is imperialism. Well, imperial means empire, and in the era 1750 to 1900, the Western European powers, and to a lesser extent the United States and Japan, established empires outside of their borders. Western Europe's empires were global, with territories in Africa, Asia, North and South America, Australia, and islands in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. Britain's territories were so vast that Britain's subjects could claim that the sun never sets on the British Empire. By the end of this era, Britain's imperial possessions covered 1/4 of the earth. Europeans had established colonies in other parts of the world since the age of exploration, but in the late 19th century, there was really nothing new about Europe extending its control and power over other parts of the world. Europeans first used this word imperialism, however, in the mid-19th century to describe the web of transoceanic colonial empires that they had built beginning in 1870. The word refers to the European domination of other nations and cultures, such as those in Africa and Eastern Asia, the only parts of the world not already dominated by Europeans. However, other nations beside those in Europe also became imperialistic in the late 19th century. So, thus Japan and the United States, really. So in this era, the word colonization took on a new meaning as well. And that referred to the political, economic, and social structures that were created by Europeans in foreign lands that supported their efforts to dominate native cultures. Many political leaders viewed imperialism as the only way to preserve national security, and they also saw new colonies as a possible outlet for the population explosion that was brought on by the advances of the Industrial Revolution. Also, industrialization had created a need for raw materials to support European manufacturing. Colonies provided a means of obtaining raw materials as well as an outlet for manufactured goods, and parts of Europe were greatly overpopulated, and another motivation for imperialist expansion was to create opportunities for Europeans elsewhere. But imperialism in Africa, India, and parts of Asia created a system whereby the continents were economically, politically, and socially subjugated to European powers. And the long-term effects of imperialism lingered even after the Western powers lost their colonies as a result of the global wars of the 20th century. So let's talk about some causes of imperialism. The mechanization of industry and resulting improvements in transportation brought new demands for raw materials, such as palm oil as a machine lubricant and rubber for tires. The industrial age also produced military weaponry, such as the machine gun and the repeating rifle, which gave Western nations a military advantage over developing nations. And this is perhaps the most frightening tool of the imperialist age. The power of these kind of weapons is illustrated by events in 1898 when a British force with only 20 machine guns killed a force of 11,000 Sudanese men. And they were fighting against their lives against the Mahdi, and we'll talk about that later. But this was a huge victory and just an incredible show of industrial strength. The Industrial Revolution also saw the application of steam to ships, and steamships could travel previously unnavigable rivers, allowing Europeans to reach the interior regions of continents. And it also brought the application of science to the study of health, which resulted in preventative measures against the threat of malaria, which was a common tropical disease to which most Europeans were not immune. Now, nationalism, or intense pride in one's culture also contributed to the new imperialism of the 19th and early 20th century. Nationalism proved as both a positive and a negative force. A common language and culture resulted in the unification of the Italian city-states into one nation in 1870, and then the following year the German principalities also formed to a single nation state. But there were numerous, within the Austrian Empire, there were numerous nations with different languages, religions, and institutions. And its diversity led Russia to try to impose the Russian language on all of its peoples. Nationalism also, well, first, older European nations engaged in an unofficial competition to see who could grab the most territory around the world. And if so, like for example, if England claimed this, then France wanted that, and et cetera, et cetera. And new nations like Germany and Italy wanted to show that they belong with the so-called great powers, so they got in on this game too. Now, economics, controlling world markets was an idea going back to the first round of European imperialism in the 16th and 17th centuries. In this new imperialism, not only were governments and their treasuries involved, but also multinational corporations. And these multinational corporations were putting pressure on governments to help them claim their share of the global economy. The economic stakes were great because the amount and value of global trade was also greater. Africa and Asia held vast amounts of raw materials like cotton, rubber, and minerals that industrialized nations wanted to keep their economies booming. European imperialists saw Africa and Asia as a potential market for their mass-produced goods like cloth and steel. And then, of course, you have the white man's burden. White Europeans believed they were doing their little brown brothers, and I say that with quotations, in Africa, Asia, and Oceania a favor by conquering them. After all, they reasoned the Europeans developed the inventions of the Industrial Revolution and made it possible to travel the world. So by bringing them technology and education and medicine and Christianity, this was a noble cause for them. And we call it the white man's burden, named after the poem by Rudyard Kipling. During the late 1800s, conservatives in industrialized countries used two related schools of political thought to justify and facilitate the many inequalities created by imperialism. One was scientific racism, which was developed by a Frenchman, and he argued that Europeans were superior to the other races, and it was based on the belief that basic differences existed among the races that made black people inherently inferior to whites. And it was an attempt to justify the inferior positions of black people in societies and economies. Social Darwinism was combined with this scientific racism. It was a stretch of Charles Darwin's thesis concerning the survival of the fittest. And Darwinism was based on Darwin's scientific theory of natural selection, and social Darwinism applied that to treating people inferiorly. It was used to explain why some people became wealthy while others remained poor. And social Darwinists went further, however, and argued that stronger and more capable individuals competed better and became more successful. Therefore, white domination of less well-developed cultures was a natural and just situation.